So welcome everyone. This is the Zoom Away Blue Friday for Friday, March 19th. This is Keys to Avoiding Deep Trouble. And we're proud to bring this call to you in an effort from TRAK Kayaks to continue to provide value and experiences and learning lessons from other folks who are passionate about kayaking to help build confidence and competence in the water, with the aim that we can really have the result of helping everyone live a life unleashed through helping you to achieve your goals and to getting the tools that you need to get out there and accomplish things that you are on your bucket list. So let's, I just want to, first of all, as we start this call, is to welcome everyone in the presence of spring. We're approaching the equinox. So I want to, for those in the north, well, I just want to wish you a happy spring. And for those that are south of the equator, rolling into fall, may you have a very pleasant fall here. This program is part of a series called Beyond the Boat. We do this, which is oriented for intermediate and advanced kayakers like yourself. We also offer a beginner series called 3 Steps to Kayaking. My name is Hans. I'm hailing from the wild, wet west coast of British Columbia on Vancouver Island. And I am a longtime TRAK pilot and sea kayaker, outdoor educator, and Director of Development at TRAK Kayaks. Today's subject is, we are really proud to introduce Joe, who is going to speak on remote sea kayaking logistics. And a little bit of a housekeeping notes is I've got everyone muted except for Joe, and I encourage you to just control your own mute. We'd love for this to be interactive. But Joe and I are going to have a dialogue at first, then we're going to invite you into it. The place to engage in the conversation right now would be in the chat box. And so I invite you to find that. Let us know where you're hailing from, like Dirk did. And we'd love to get a sense of where our audience is coming from. A couple of acknowledgements, as I see we've got some TRAK pilots and community members on. Want to welcome you. If you're new to the program, also welcome. Really glad to have you. And if you're listening into this as a recording downstream, then also we're really pleased to have you part of this conversation. So I want to do a little guest intro. We're super proud to announce our guest today. Joe Oesterling has been a guide for 20 plus years. Welcome, Joe, to the call.
Thanks very much for having me. It's great to be here.
So, Joe, now a little introduction to you. You started paddling in the late 90s on Lake Michigan and Lake Superior, touring the summers, and then paddling the gales in November when they kicked up and would do some surfing. You know, I remember watching these old surf videos, and they would go to the Midwest, and you see these guys in their kayakers, the farmers out on the surf in the winter. You know, their quote in my mind that sticks is the Midwestern accent saying, "It's all about the stoke." Surfing these ankle biters on the Great Lakes. Was that you?
Oh, there's more than ankle biters out there, let me tell you. About Labor Day, you can count on winds kicking up. So I grew up and started paddling on the shores of Lake Michigan on the eastern shore.
Terrific.
Western shore. And yeah, Labor Day, you could count on it. And you just paddle right through the winter.
So these days, Joe, I mean, you started traveling to Alaska in 1998. And like Alaska does for many, it really captured you in a way that you now really identify yourself as we are Alaskans. You live in Haines, Alaska right now with your wife, Tracy, and sounds like you've got a kennel of dogs as well. Yes. You've been an avid mountaineer. You've traveled throughout North and South America as a guide and instructor. I can see why you're drawn to Alaska. You're a certified level 3 ACA kayak instructor and a TRAK pilot, and you run TRAK experiences in Southeast Alaska. You've got one on the books for this August. And among your other accomplishments, Joe, you're also a certified search and rescue dog handler and a trainer, it sounds like, with an outfit called Sea Dog. So you're on call 24/7 for deployment throughout Alaska. So it sounds like you're visiting some of the more remote places in the world, helping dig people out of sticky situations on remote expeditions.
It happens. Yeah, it's amazing.
Yeah. So as a part of that, you also hold a wilderness first responder cert, probably for the last 20 years. You have a captain's license with the U.S. Coast Guard, a master mariner with a 50-ton license.
Yep.
And you run a company called SEAK Expeditions, and that stands for Southeast Alaska Expeditions. What I know about your company is that you're really committed to a pool of veteran guides that really specialize in guiding backcountry trips. So they're remote in nature, even at the starting point. And it sounds like some of your criteria for that are, exceptional local knowledge, a high degree of wilderness skills, and that everybody on your team has certification as ACA instructors. Tell us a little bit about SEAK Expeditions and the types of programs that you run there.
So SEAK Expeditions came about because we were seeing trips that we wanted to do that weren't really being offered in our area. And so being a guide in the area, we decided that why not work for other companies. We'll just start doing the trips that we want to do because we think that everyone else would want to do them too. So yeah, and so we do our guides. We bring new guides in, that have little experience, but they do not do our long wilderness trips. They might just help out with courses, work as assistant guides, and also we do some day trips for people who are visiting Haines as well. So they kind of cut their teeth.
Great. So you really differentiate between those that are on your team that serve kind of the summer push locally, and those that are really kind of check the box as wilderness guides.
Yes.
From what I understand is that your focus on the remote wilderness guide, it sounds like it's built around a few kind of really critical things. One is exceptional technical skills. One is rigorous training on safety and rescue and wilderness medicine. Another is local knowledge on weather, tides, currents, and natural history, and wilderness skills in the event of survival. So it sounds like you really kind of set the standard for your team, not unlike the International Sea Kayak Guides Association.
Yeah, and in fact, we really use that sort of as a model as far as the skills that we want our guides to have. So it's a great model to be able to work from, most definitely.
Terrific. One of the things it's on your website for SEAK Expeditions is that when you describe yourselves as "we are Alaskans." What does that mean to you to be Alaskan?
Boy, I feel like Alaska is different than any other place I've been in the world. It's even the communities we live in are remote. Like right now, if I had to get out of here for medical attention, it would be a real chore because we're in the middle of a snowstorm. And so our guides need to embody that sort of independence and sort of, figuring out things as you go, because you never know what's going to happen. And, you may never know when help is going to be available to you. So that's what we mean by we are Alaskans.
Terrific. I got it. There's another TRAK pilot in the chat room kind of sounding off that there are 10 to 14 footers on Lake Michigan yesterday. So yeah. So you missed the storm cycle there, Joe.
I missed that. I really do.
Yeah. So back to Alaska. From a paddler's perspective, can you just give us a sense of place of what Southeast Alaska is like? What does it hold for us as paddlers if we're interested in visiting your neighborhood for a trip?
I mean, if I had to put it into one word, it would be wilderness. If you look at the amount of wilderness that we have, you look at the Tongass National Forest that abuts the Kluane Wilderness. This is the largest expanse of wilderness in the world. And so we have this right at our back door. We're in the middle of a temperate rainforest that runs all the way from the coast of Oregon all the way up past the south central part of Alaska to the western coast. We have a really dynamic seascape. I mean, there's big tide races if you want to go find them. There are super deep fjords that we just happen to live on. Probably other than, I believe, Greenland, the fjord we live on is the deepest in North America. Yeah. So it's in excess of 2,000 feet deep in places.
Terrific. One of the things that I really was most notable for me, I worked for a number of years in Alaska, several seasons in Prince William Sound, and then went to Southeast Alaska and worked several seasons there. And what really struck me, Joe, was the density of wildlife.
Oh man, you're not kidding. Everything from marine mammal species to land species. You know, I tell people that come here, you know, one of the big questions is, are we going to see brown bears? And I tell them, when I walk out of my door in the morning, I look both ways, because there's almost always the chance that I'm going to have a brown bear in my yard. So we have a really a dense population of brown bears, but then even our sea life. You know, there's transient and permanent populations of humpbacks in this fjord, as well as orca. We have some really great stellar sea lion haul outs. I mean, for a paddler, there's nothing greater than going and watching and listening to those guys. Yeah, I mean, we could go on and on and on.
Yeah. Yeah. Terrific. One of the things that was notable for me was, you know, I've been to a few places like the Galapagos, for example. You go there and you're like, oh, this is a place for animals where they accommodate humans. As opposed to, you know, everywhere else in the world feels like it's a place for humans where they accommodate animals. And Southeast Alaska felt like one of those places where I was a minority as a human from a species perspective.
I think you're 100% right.
Yeah. So we've got a trip there, a TRAK kayak trip slated for August on the Channel Islands. We'll talk more about that a little bit later. But this is in the context of that area you're describing here.
Oh, yes, most definitely. So it's a little bit of a misnomer. The Lynn Canal is just a really long and deep fjord, and why they named it a canal, I have no idea. But that stretches from the capital city of Juneau up to just past Haines, up to a small community named Skagway.
Okay.
And that's where that trip will be operated. Yes.
Terrific. And so, Joe, let me ask you this. You're clearly passionate about sharing this experience with other people's. You've been an educator, you've been a guide. What do you like most about coaching kayaking?
Boy, I think the thing I like the most about coaching and guiding as well is that we can give people the freedom to go do this on their own. We can build skills, build experience, and we don't want you to just come out with us. Of course, we would love it if everybody just came with us all the time, but we want to give you the ability to go and do these trips on your own, you know, because we want to see other places in the world as well. So we want everyone else to be able to do the same thing.
Great. So it sounds like your trips are really about empowerment, and that's what motivates and drives you.
Absolutely.
So what I'd like to do is make this really interactive for folks that are on the line here to help put this in context for us. And I'm gonna try something new, and that is I'd love to pair folks that have aspirations of going someplace to folks who have maybe been there on this call to help make remote expedition planning more, I guess, user-friendly for you. And so I invite you right now, the first step is all of you, is to think about a remote destination you'd like to go and put it into the chat box. Let us know where you'd like to go, a remote sea kayaking destination in the world, what's on your bucket list. And then later we're going to find out maybe where some people have actually, if they've been there. And we can make those connections. So I just thought of that. So we're going to roll with that one. So in the meantime, Joe, before we dive into the content, one thing that's kind of a burning question for all of us that are guides or educators in the field or run trips is that our businesses have been affected by COVID considerations. Certainly last year, and we're rolling into another year of it this season. How is your organization really managing your operations this summer in the reality of COVID that's going to really help you have a successful trip for yourself, your guides, and the safety of your clients?
Well, I think we have a great advantage over maybe a lot of other parts of the world right now, because the state of Alaska has done such a tremendous job with vaccination that we will probably in the next month or two statewide have everyone vaccinated that wants to be vaccinated. So there's no greater reason to come to Alaska this year than to just be amongst those that are already vaccinated. But we are, we also have a program we're doing. We're offering trips that are for your bubble or your private group. We always do that, but we're doing it even more so this year to maintain that level of safety and confidence for people.
Okay.
And really, I mean, if you think about it, you're staying within the United States if you're traveling from the United States, so you don't really have an international border to cross, which makes things a little easier. And you're coming to a community of, if we're in town here, it's only 2,000 people. And so we're only spending a little bit of time in the community, at which, we have our COVID protocols in place. And then we're going out into the wilderness where it's easy to social distance. And we've made some accommodations as far as, the way we're serving our meals now, how many people are sleeping in each tent. You have the choice if you want to have your own tent. Absolutely, we'll guarantee that. So it's all that sort of stuff.
Okay, cool, great. It sounds like you've got a well thought out game plan. It sounds like one is you're accommodating your typical kind of trip format to allow for bubbles to exist exclusively on trips. It sounds like the reality for the United States market is they're unencumbered going to this remote location because they can fly direct to Haines without crossing an international border. So they have no real quarantine considerations. And it sounds like you've got the flexibility with immediate access to the wilderness that you really minimize any risk.
Yeah, most definitely.
Okay, terrific. By the way, we got some great sound outs here from folks on the line here of places that they want to paddle in remote areas, everywhere from the Isle of Royal and Lake Superior to Vancouver Island, the coast of Norway, San Juan Islands, Inside Passage. So I invite you to take a look at that list. And if you've been in one of those places and can offer some guidance for folks, for example, that wants to go to Playa del Carmen or Carmen City, you can message Rebecca on the chat here and get in touch and provide some additional inside information. But let's start with this subject now. We're here to talk about remote sea kayak logistics. One of the things that I want to unpack, if you will, is let's identify, first of all, what are some of the high level problems with remote trips? Like, why do we need to talk about this?
We kind of go into that whole idea of the whole likelihood of an event occurring. And if that event does occur, what are the consequences of that event, right?
I see. So one of the problems is that they're inherently a little more risky.
Exactly.
Okay, so you step into something where you somewhat lose some control, and the same things that you're doing in the front country suddenly have a higher risk. And if you're doing it in a more remote location. Okay, so what are some of the opportunities that exist if we can solve some of those problems around?
Boy, so once you kind of get into feeling comfortable with planning remote trips, and well, let's go back and define what remote is. First of all, it's any place in which assistance may be limited. Right. So we live in a community in Southeast Alaska that we consider a remote community because we don't have access to help readily when we need it. We have to wait almost all the time.
Yeah.
Right? And so, if that is a factor in those remote planning trips, if you can work through that, you can essentially apply those skills of planning to a trip in Southeast Alaska, to a trip in Greenland, to a trip in Antarctica. So it's all sort of the same steps. It's just different levels and different factors to consider.
I see. So it sounds like really what you're saying, the big idea, you know, if we can solve some of those problems, then it really opens up the world in a way. So the big idea here really is once you're comfortable planning 3 to 5 day excursions, and then solve some of the remote logistic pieces, just the world opens up to you for paddling in a way that it seemed limited before. So from Greenland to Antarctica, it's just a matter of marrying what are the considerations for remote relative to the basic fundamentals of any planning expedition. Gives you is a key to unlock the world, if you will.
Exactly. Yes.
Okay, great. In that spirit, we've got a good list of places that people want to go. Yeah, in that spirit, I do recommend now places that you've been with that definition of remote. Let us hear from you. What are some of the remote trips that you've done? Let us know where you've been that qualifies as a remote paddling destination. And we might draw on you for some ideas and tips, some pro tips, if you will, from your experience to get there. But as we do that, we're clear on the big idea. We're clear on why this is important. Let's talk about some of the key points then. Where do you start, Joe, when you think about if this is based on, you know, the fundamentals of 3 to 5 day trips, then where do you start and how do you do that? What's that framework?
Yeah, so we kind of apply a framework to trips that are on the shorter side to even to trips that are, you know, 2-3 weeks long in duration. So we first look at who's going on this trip, right? We're going to look at the skill set that people have, the level of experience they have, and maybe their goals for the trip. Right? So that's first sort of your who, right? And then we're going to look at, so where are we going, right? Are we going to have access to the road system? Are we going to be near a small community? So, and then look at some of the characteristics of maybe where we'll be able to camp. What's the shoreline like? And then we're going to be looking at what do we need? Like what sort of equipment do we need? Do we need to have super warm clothing? Can we get away with just, you know, a basic kit? And then we're going to be looking at when we're going, because that's going to impact all those things that we were just talking about previously, right? If we're going to be doing a trip in the middle of July, we may have certain things with us that we won't if we're going to be doing a trip in November. And then what's our motivation? Why are we doing this? Are we trying to circumnavigate Kodiak Island? Or are we just a group going out for 4 or 5 days to just experience Southeast Alaska? So that's sort of the framework we apply at the very start of our planning process.
Okay, cool. So that's really great. So this is something you would apply for any trip, whether it's, you know, immediate to your backyard or really remote, but it shares the fundamental pieces. These are the questions you need to answer going to any expedition. And I love the who part about just identifying what the capabilities of your team are to ensure it's appropriate. The what really gets clear on what are the route options that matches that level of experience and expertise potentially. The when is really critical for understanding what are some of the weather considerations. I like that. And the where might be a little more specific to exact route specifications. And I guess if you unpack why a little bit, there's a couple of things there. There's individual goals, there's group goals, and then there's a sense of expanded purpose. What are we collectively looking to accomplish in general that is beyond the individual or the group goals that is a bigger picture consideration?
Yes, very much so.
Yeah, bringing those together are super important to be able to balance all that. So let's use that as a basis then. That's the fundamentals of any trip that we put together, and there are varying degrees of that. I get that. And one of the things that brings up is how we kind of document and get clarity on that. What are some of the tools that you use, Joe, specifically for getting that type of clarity when you're considering an expedition?
Oh boy, I mean, we sit down and we basically pencil out the whole trip, right? So we have this idea of building a trip plan, which incorporates a float plan as well. Not, you know, that's just part of the trip plan. But that pretty much takes that framework and answers all of the questions specifically. And then, we have to roll off of that when things maybe don't line up. But that gives us a nice basis to start from and should cover all of the bases that we need to, kind of deal with any problem that might come up.
Okay, terrific. Excellent. One of the things that I just dropped into the chat for everyone is an example of a passage plan that's really an expanded passage plan. I know that we use kind of two different kind of passage plans when we're thinking about a track trip. Is we look at a passage plan, kind of like I just dropped in the chat room, that's really comprehensive. That is the kind of float plan you'd leave behind. You have it all done before you go, and you take a copy with you. But this is also a copy that you might leave behind that search and rescue could have access to if there's an incident of some nature. And it gets absolute clarity across the team about who you are, what your medical history might be, what are some of your capabilities, what is the forecast and ideal route, what is the big picture synopsis, if you will. And so this is the kind of float plan you do before you go. And it's not really adjusted on the fly. There's another float plan for that. But it sounds like in terms of the high level planning, this is the type of float plan that you would start with.
Yes.
So let's talk about then, once we've got that framework in place, what are some of the key things that you want to really next identify that are unique to remote trips?
Well, the first one isn't necessarily unique to remote trips, but I think it becomes a really big factor, and we kind of touched on it before, as far as is just safety, right? If we're not safe, then no one's going to be having a good time, which is our ultimate goal, right?
Okay.
And so we start to look at that whole likelihood of an incident occurring in relation to the consequences of that incident if it does happen. Right.
Okay.
So that's always in our mind, and we're sort of evaluating things as we go, minute by minute, sometimes hour by hour, definitely day by day.
I get that. So it sounds like the safety considerations and risk management change as soon as you step out to a further distance from definitive care or assistance.
Absolutely.
And maybe to help people visualize what you're talking about in terms of the continuums of on one axis being the likelihood of an event occurring, and the other axis being the consequences of that event. At some point, you could take a look and draw a line diagonally across that, and on one side is acceptable risk, on one side is unacceptable risk.
Correct.
So the way you manage that risk will differ, even if you're doing the same thing in your backyard. If you're 5 days away from definitive care, it's a different ball game.
Exactly. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. One of the things that I can help provide with that is we use on our trips and in our educational process a decision-making triangle that really speaks to some of the considerations when you're evaluating risk with regard to subjective hazard, objective hazard, and the human factor. Mm-hmm. And so I'm going to put that in as well as a resource that people could use when they're thinking about risk management on the water. But the big takeaway there is to manage that risk. You've got to be more conservative the more remote you are, and be really clear about how the line of acceptable versus unacceptable changes based on extraction logistics.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, that crossing that you're going to do on a nice sunny day with a forecast of clear skies and light winds is still taken with a level of seriousness when you're, 50 miles from any sort of civilization whatsoever, and you're looking at least 5 hours for help.
Yeah, I love this conversation right now, and I love what's going on in the chat space. Todd Hyatt, for example, just mentioned a couple of places that like the Okefenokee Swamp, the Florida Everglades, the Swanee River, that area of like, Southeast Georgia, for example, when you think about it at first, you don't have to take a float plane to get there, but it can be definitively remote. You can be a 2-day paddle from the road access, even though you're sort of in a major, civilized area.
Sure.
You can be, as the crow flies, 45 miles from a nuclear submarine base, but it can still take you 4 days to get out.
Absolutely. Yeah. Remote doesn't have to be necessarily just in the middle of nowhere.
So that's super critical. I know Jeff and Cathy, who are on the line here, did a trip with us in Baja. They were pilots and helped guide one of our educational trips there, a 7-day tour in Loreto Islands. And as soon as you leave that shore, even though there's an airport right on the mainland, with a norte blowing up, it can be inaccessible to get you out. And so you find yourself just by the addition of weather suddenly in a remote spot. Yeah,
absolutely. And that, I mean, just stepping out my door and going for a day paddle, I can be in that exact same situation.
Great. Yeah. So really great distinction, Joe. Thanks for bringing that to our attention. And thanks in the chat room of kind of bringing up those examples to help us see that remote isn't necessarily a long way away. It's just, distance and time from definitive care.
Exactly.
Or support. Great. Awesome. Let's move on to the next thing. So what's another consideration that's top of mind for you as you're thinking about remote sea kayak logistics?
Yeah, and this one kind of just rolls right off of the whole idea of safety, is that we're always thinking about communications, right? We're constantly checking in with our headquarters during a trip to make sure we're kind of staying on schedule. But really those communications are there for a safety net, in case something happens, right? And so, and we're in an area that, we usually are carrying at least 3 forms of communication because we need to build in redundancy in case something does happen. And so one of the big one for us is satellite. So we're either carrying satellite phones or satellite communicators that some people might be familiar with, the inReach, or I think the Spot. Now you can actually communicate a little more. And so the phone is, obviously everyone knows what a sat phone is, but the communicator, like the inReach, will actually link with your smartphone so that you can actually text from your smartphone using a satellite to, your headquarters or your family or something like that. So
I see.
There's that. And then, we always carry VHF radios. And here we carry both a VHF that will work land to water, but we also carry a VHF that is land to air in case we have to communicate with either fixed wing aircraft or helicopters. So it's maybe something that's a little different that people aren't used to.
Great. Yeah, those are super handy. I've used those a lot in the mountains and in Wyoming and the Wind Rivers. Very, very common tool there, especially if you have a flight path overhead. You can actually communicate with a 30,000-foot jet flying over from a handheld radio, which is a really great tool if you're going to be traveling in a remote place on a flight path. Now, in Southeast Alaska, I presume you're on a flight path, probably a polar flight path, maybe from Japan to Europe. How much are you able to kind of experiment and test with that particular tool if you choose to use it?
Well, we use that more. I mean, we have so much air activity here, just small plane activity, that we use it much more for that. So we practice and test in that sort of realm a lot more than we've tried to contact commercial airliners that are 35,000 feet.
Yeah. Cool. Yeah, most of us use the VHF radios. I like how you brought up that other idea. How does somebody get into or research, if they're thinking about a remote trip, a land to air VHF radio?
Boy, if you're thinking about a remote trip and you're going to utilize either fixed wing aircraft or a helicopter, I would just call up the company that you're thinking about going with and or that operates in the area you're going to be and talk to them about it.
Okay.
They use it more than anybody. So.
And are these typically devices that you rent or that you have to own?
We own them, but what you might look into doing is just getting one from the company that you're going to go with. If they're going to do a drop and a pickup, then they want to know, if you're on schedule and if anything's gone wrong, because they're probably your lifeline anyways. So a lot of those companies will just let you use one for your trip, or they'll let you rent one for your trip instead of having to incur the cost on your own.
Right. So even on personal trips, it sounds like you really promote and recommend working with a local guide service, letting them do your logistics, maybe renting some of the safety gear from them, and them being a primary point of contact back to additional resources that you need.
Absolutely. Yes.
Yeah. Great. Fantastic. That's a really great tip for remote trips. I know we do that in Baja. We run our own trips, but we work with an outfitter there. And one of the great things about that is that, they can send us weather information that we couldn't otherwise get. And they're on call for us in case we need to have an evacuation. So they're our evacuation plan and they're geared up for it. We've met. They know, they've got our list of who our paddlers are, what their boats look like, and who any medical considerations and what the contact information is for those individuals.
Yeah, and they usually have great local connections to boat and air service, not to mention a lot of people in these companies are part of their search and rescue teams. So.
Okay, great. One of the things I want to add to that idea of communication is internal communication. And so I've provided one very extensive passage plan idea that's really good for just outlining your trip before you go. I'm going to put a passage plan in that we use here at TRAK on our trips. That's the daily route planner that just gets really good communication internally about what we plan to do within that day, and really identifying what's the route description in great detail that I could navigate by this if I lost my chart. And so that if everybody's really clear about that in the briefing and you've really identified it, then it makes simply, following that plan easy. Your decision points are already identified, and what your turnaround point might be and what your contingencies are along the way.
Yeah, that's great. Clear communication. I mean, it's so important on either a guided trip or a personal trip.
Cool.
Absolutely.
Okay, so we've covered that we're going to base this on the foundation of applying a framework that you would use on any kind of trip. We're expanding that into remote with the idea of how the safety and risk management considerations change because the consequences are at a different level of the continuum. We've identified that communications is essential and some ideas and tools and tactics for internal versus external communications. What are some of the questions that people might have about any of those things around communications? We've talked about cell phones that may be less reliable. We've talked about land to air radio use through VHF, satellite text, which you could own the device and rent, sat phones, which you could own or rent and subscribe to. And then we talked about float plans for internal communication. Did we mention EPIRBs on that, Joe?
No, not yet. And so EPIRBs, there's both personal locator beacons and EPIRBs, and EPIRBs are sort of associated with the vessel. And typically you'll find those, like I'll have in our motorized vessel for our water taxi, we have an EPIRB, but we also carry a personal locator beacon, which is kind of the same thing, but it's just for the individual. And those are, pretty reasonable as far as cost. And I think everyone should have one if you're out paddling, if you don't already.
Yeah. So does your outfitter group, do you rent those?
We do not rent those in particular, but if people are coming and we're outfitting them, we recommend that they purchase them and have them themselves. Yes.
Right. And so it sounds like if folks want to come and do a trip in Southeast Alaska, one thing they could do, Joe, is it sounds like even if they want to do their own personal trip, they could work through SEAK Expeditions and you could do the outfitting, maybe even the provisioning and the logistics, and they can, they can otherwise be on their own.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, a lot of the companies that are in this industry work both as guide services and outfitters.
Yeah.
And we definitely do. And I feel like we have a good firm grasp on all of the challenges for our particular area. And our particular area is all of Southeast Alaska. So we have connections and relationships with air charter services, water charter services, and then just sort of the support services in all those areas.
Right. Fantastic. Let's talk about, I think the big missing piece when we think about remote sea kayak expeditions is, the actual put-ins and takeouts. What about transportation? Let's talk about that.
Transportation is huge. A lot of times we won't be starting our trip right in the metropolis of Haines. We need to get to where we're going to start our trip. And also don't forget that transportation is probably your lifeline if something does go wrong, right? And so in our region, not having much of a road system, most of the towns are not on road systems. We do have what's called the Alaska Marine Highway System, which is a ferry system that runs up from Bellingham, Washington, up through Southeast Alaska, essentially the Inside Passage. Do you have that as an option to use to get to maybe a put in or take out at the end of your trip back to your starting point? So that's a great resource. And then we basically travel by either water or air. So there's lots of water taxis or water charter services that you can implement into your trip. So that they have some limitations. When the sea state gets to a certain point, if it's an uninspected vessel, they can't legally even operate. And plus, you probably wouldn't want to be in that vessel in those conditions as well. But they do offer some advantages over air travel in that, if you're on a trip and you guys are all using hard shell kayaks, that's hard to get into a plane, right? Yeah. The TRAK kayak is sort of a game changer for us because we can throw those things in a plane and go anywhere. That's great. Yeah. We're really super happy. But if you're all using hard shells, then a water taxi or some sort of charter on the water is really a great idea.
Let's talk about those two things for a minute. You've identified that, if you're, that first of all, TRAK as a portable sea kayak is a game changer because it gives you access to air transport, either float plane or landing on a gravel bar or a beach. Really opens up a whole new area for you. But if you're doing hard shells, you can't do the air transport easily, and you do the water taxi. And it sounds like they both have weather limitations. What about the cost? What are you seeing in your area of expense? Is air travel more or less expensive than a water taxi?
Well, you have to look at how far you're going to be going in relationship to the cost of what you're going to be paying for it, right? So I think when you pencil it out, the amount of time it takes me to get from point A to point B and what that's going to cost me as far as water travel and what it's going to cost me as far as air travel, they're going to pencil out and be pretty close to each other, right? Okay. If you look at it on a per hour basis, then water taxis are much cheaper than air travel. But remember, you can go much further, much quicker by air than you can by water. So.
True. Yeah. And the bigger considerations other considerations are that the water taxi is going to be less sensitive to weight. But if you're traveling by air, you might need to be more restrictive in the amount of provisions that you have or the amount of gear you take.
Correct. Yeah, it's sort of a volume and weight issue between the two. Yes.
Great. And then you also mentioned, though, the ferry as an access, the marine ferry. Now, if I wanted to go from Seattle, for example, to come take this trip in Haines, the TRAK trip in August, can I take the ferry service up there?
Absolutely. You can walk on with your kayak and take the ferry all the way to Haines and get off with your kayak and take your trip and do the same thing in reverse if you like.
That sounds better than a cruise.
It is. Well, I think so. Yeah, no, it's a really unique opportunity that we have living in Southeast Alaska to have this as part of our life. And, and it's really an integral part of our life in these communities.
Yeah, Really fantastic. Okay. One of the things I want to invite people to do is take a look at this really great list that folks identified of places they want to paddle. I know that as I go down through here, TRAK is certainly offering a lot of these, like the coast of Norway, Dirk. TRAK has a trip coming up on northern Norway that's a mothership support trip that's off of an old sailing schooner. Vancouver Island, of course. For folks that don't know, I'm gonna make an announcement here. Is that TRAK Kayaks has just moved from Airdrie, Alberta to Vancouver Island. We're now located on the Salish Sea on the east coast of Vancouver Island. So we're a great local knowledge for you, Deborah. If you want to come to the island, you've got a great place to come in, hang out. You can camp in the backyard, and we'll get you the local information you need, and maybe even help out with logistics. Sounds like Ken's wanting to go to the San Juans. Your discussion about the ferry, Joe. Washington State has a similar thing. So somebody like Ken, who wants to go to the San Juans, could probably hop on pretty easily with a TRAK and roll onto the ferry, get off in Friday Harbor, and go from there. Yeah. I've done that trip. So if Ken, you want to get in touch with me about that, I'm happy to share with you some details on San Juan's, and I think Bruce wants to go, so he could probably help you out as a paddling companion. But this has been really helpful, Joe. I think you've illuminated, first of all, the value of really breaking the seal or understanding some of these things, because it really opens the world up for us. And then if we're comfortable planning 3 to 5 day trips, just solving the remote logistics pieces opens up that world for us entirely. And the foundational piece that you gave on a framework is really helpful to start doing that if we aren't planning trips. What I love to do is just plan the trip. You don't have to go, but just planning the trip really helps you orient about its possibility and the realities of it. And so it can come off your bucket list into one step further toward a reality just by taking that passage plan that I gave you and map it out and see what it looks like. And once you visualize it, you might just go.
Yeah, and we use that as part of our guide training program. Is everybody does that, just that very thing.
Yeah. And, I'm also a U.S. Coast Guard captain, a license holder as well. And that's one of the things that we do in that is we constantly do navigation problems. And we get scenarios. It's like word problems. It's like, okay, you got to navigate from here to there, calculating set and drift for that in a given thing with a tide chart would be, it just wakes you up to that possibility and engages you in the process, and it becomes a learning whether you go or not. You can virtually visit in that way. So I really encourage people to take the passage plan we did, put together a mock expedition, map it out. Who knows? It might just be the catalyst you need to pull the trigger. And so we've talked about that. And then we identified that basically the 3 things that differentiate a remote trip for you, Joe, is the way that you assess risk, and specifically the elevation of consequences in a remote setting. We identified that communication becomes that much more important internally and externally, and having redundancy in that through whatever way is appropriate in the area you're going to be in. And most importantly, it sounds like leveraging local knowledge and outfitters that are there as at least contact points for expedition support is a best practice.
Absolutely.
And then thirdly, we talked about really specifically some of the considerations with remote transports, and to really explore all options that water taxis and planes and ferries all might be possibilities, with different considerations that will be balanced based on that original foundation of when you're going, who you are, what are you trying to accomplish. That could help really influence what mode of transportation you actually choose.
Yes. Yeah, those are all parts of that framework, and many more that we really don't have time to talk about too.
Yeah. Great. One of the things that resonates with me a lot, Joe, is I've done a bunch of trips, and one of the most, I guess, awakening moments that I had about being in a remote location was after doing years of outdoor education in remote places like Southeast Alaska and Patagonia. I did this one trip. We were doing 30 to 90-day trips in the Archipelago de los Chonos in Patagonia. And I had a group of 12 students that I'd never been paddling with. And we had never loaded the boats. We just had boats, and we had gear, and we had raw students. And we traveled for about a 10-hour drive to a little boat. And we took about an 11-hour chug boat ride out of Chacabuco to a remote island on the edge of the Chonos. And they dropped off a mountain of gear, a bunch of boats that had not seen the water, and a bunch of fresh students that I never really met. And then the boat goes away.
Yep.
And I'm just like, this just got real. And all of those best practices that I had thought about in training suddenly were in I related to it in a much different way. Yeah. Fortunately, we did fit all the gear into the boat. We actually spent a couple of days first wrapping our head around where we were before we tried to move, but ultimately it worked out. But incredible experience to put yourself in that area when you are truly remote. It really shifts things on an expedition.
And by putting that framework in place ahead of time, you're not going to answer every question that's going to come up. But what you're doing is you're giving yourself the tools to be able to answer the question that comes up that's unforeseen. And so that's why I think that framework is so important.
Love it. Fantastic. Dirk's asking a question here. Are there helpful tools in planning a multi-day trip on the offing? Dirk, I'm going to ask you to just unmute there and help us understand that question exactly. What are you looking for?
I thought there may be an app for a cell phone or so, which is helpful for planning how many miles on the sea you can go. International websites where you can see the currents in this location and all this.
Yeah, Dirk, I can answer that one. The tool that I use is called Navionics. And Navionics is a really great app. It's a subscription service where you can download maps for certain areas that you want to go. And all the tidal data and current data is there. And you can plan a route simply by dragging next waypoints. And it gives you all that information. And you can, punch along the way, and you can scroll and see what tidal windows are for. So that's a really great automated tool on your phone or your iPad. Navionics is the name of that one. Yeah. Is there one, Joe, that you prefer to use?
We use Navionics, and there's one other one, but it slips my mind right now. But we operating here, we always have tide charts with us, and then we're pretty familiar with our area as well. So I think that as someone not from this area coming here, either to contact an outfitter like us and get that information, or to use an app like you just described would be the best. Yeah,
Dirk, I think the apps are really great for planning purposes. My highest recommendation is going to be to download that passage plan that I sent you and fill it out in analog. For the period that you're going to be out there. That passage plan that you can download gives you an opportunity to map all that out. And I would encourage that you do it in analog rather than to being dependent upon your device or battery capabilities for something as important as your route detail.
Yeah, and redundancy really applies to not just communications, but what you just brought up as well, right? All parts of your trip should have built-in redundancies.
Yeah, really fantastic. Great. All parts of the trips. That's key. So, Joe, I'm going to put a couple of links in here of just how folks can learn more about you or get in touch with you. The first is your pilot page on TRAK Pilots, and in that is a link and I'm also going to share it here, to your outfitter, Seek Expeditions. I'm going to post that into the chat room. So to learn more about Joe and look at his online presence for Southeast Alaska expeditions, it's seekexpeditions.com. And the last link that I want to repost is, you've got a great trip coming up here in August that we're going to run. That is a TRAK trip. And so it'll be mostly TRAK kayaks. And we're going to run it out of Haines. We're going to run it in the Channel Islands. And another one of our partners, Ken Whiting, did a really great trip in the Channel Islands there not that long ago. So there's some great video content. Cole, if you're on the line, yeah, I can see you're on the line here. If you could pull up where we can find that video of Ken Whiting in the Channel Islands and put that in there, I'd love for people to get a visual on where we're going to be operating for this trip that Joe is going to be leading. And Joe, what are some other ways that people might connect with you?
We're on social media, obviously, Seek Expeditions on Facebook and Instagram, both through our website, or feel free to just give me a call. It's winter here. I need stuff to
do. So you're going to be by the phone, it sounds like.
I'm around, yeah.
Unless you're out with the dogs digging somebody out of trouble.
Exactly, yeah. Hopefully not.
Yeah. Terrific. Good. Well, Joe, thank you so much. This has been really valuable. And folks, just give me a little thumbs up as to how helpful, if this was helpful for you. And I'd love to hear your takeaways in the chat. Please just put in the chat what your insight or takeaway was from this conversation. And we'll know if we hit the mark, if you will.